Hello everyone, and bienvenue à la deuxième journée de notre conférence. I'm Josipa Petrunic, President and CEO of the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. And welcome to day 2 of our 3rd annual Low Carbon Smart Mobility Technology Conference. I'd like to again acknowledge that I am here in St. Catharines, Ontario, and my surroundings encompass the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee Nation and the Anishinaabe peoples. Over the last 18 months, without doubt, the word unprecedented has been used over and over and over as a result of the pandemic. In fact, it's been used so often that I think it's become a bit of a hackneyed term, and I don't think it actually even means anything anymore. So maybe it's more effective to talk about the fact that it's been a year of shock and awe. Shock at the fact that our generation has experienced a global pandemic, lots of virus, lots of vaccines, lots of confusion, and awe, because at times, although it's been disturbing, it has required leadership. And we have at times been both shocked and in awe with our elected officials, our elected leaders, our medical professionals, and all of the other people that we're trying to take advice from. And we've all gone through it together. So we've also had shock and awe in the transit industry in this last year. Shock at the exponential drop-off in ridership. And we've heard a lot of our speakers yesterday talk about that catastrophic drop-off in their ridership, facing the what-ifs last year of municipal budgets that were essentially broken. But we also had a lot of awe in this industry over the last 12 months. Awe at how quickly many of our transit agency members responded, how well they got to the business of planning forward for a hashtag green recovery, awe at how they have really focused at overcoming the persistent problems that existed even before the pandemic. The evils of congestion, jammed, crushed capacity buses, LRTs and subways under constructed in our cities, low ridership in suburban environments. These things existed pre-pandemic. And we were often awestruck by the fact that our agencies facing this global unprecedented scenario were actually back at the table planning for a future forward to overcome those pre-existing problems. Last December, I even had one of my transit colleagues that I've come to really admire extensively in the industry. She said to me, Josipa, I've never been so motivated in my career before. I've never been so scared personally, but I've never been so motivated. And I think a lot of us can empathize with that sense of excitement and that sense of motivation to want to do something. Because over the last year, when things weren't clear, and maybe many of us lived with people who had health problems in our families, or we had children in our families, and so we were really quite scared. I mean, frankly, being scared is an entirely normal thing to have had happened over the last year, and probably a lot of us still are scared about the health of our families and our communities. But at the same time, generally, when you're scared like that, you don't want to feel helpless. It's like what happens when you mourn the death of someone. You don't want to feel helpless, but you do. And so you have this desire to act. And in the transit industry, we saw that rather than feeling helpless, loads of people came forward really wanting to act. I know last year at this time, on our own team, we had a lot of discussions about wanting to act and staring in the face of the COVID-19 onslaught. What we decided to do as a team was get together with our colleagues at the Ontario Public Transit Association under the leadership of Karen Cameron, and we launched a COVID-19 webinar supported by Kelly Polezny, the chair of OPTA. And that COVID-19 webinar really focused on acting on the basis of emergency solutions that could help transit serve the nation and frontline emergency workers. And what we did was, in the course of that discussion, all of us wanting to act, we got a whole bunch of global US and Canadian transit experts come to the table and explain in rational and calm terms the fact that transit has actually always served as an emergency backup vehicle or system. It's addressed forest fires in California. It's helped in school shootings in Texas and beyond. It's helped during earthquakes. It's helped during floods. And knowing that the same methods of emergency response could and should be re-leveraged for an unpredictable viral future, that really gave us all a sense that we could act and we could act reasonably in our neighborhoods. Our own team at CUTRIC then went further and we took a look at some of the global studies coming out of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Central Africa, where the Ebola pandemic has come back 3 times over in the last decade and a half. And those agencies, those cities, those public mobility services, they got really used to using public vehicles and transit vehicles as a mechanism for paramedic services, for mobile labs, for mobile testing, and even for mobile mortuaries if and when needed. And we took those examples and we shared them with our industry last year and said, look, like we could and should act, we can act and we do want to, and we can build on best practices from other jurisdictions in the world. And the result of that small action was we had a lot of transit agencies come forward, and folks that I've come to know really well over the years say that essentially the COVID-19 pandemic has actually made them hyper aware, not only of the need of transit to act currently in the context of an emergency, but to really be prepared for the fact that climate change is going to lead to more cataclysmic disasters. And transit has to be at the core of responding to that in the long term, not just in the heat of the moment of an emergency response. And that includes everything from zoonotic illnesses that continue to spread because of globalization to the immediate climate emergencies of floodings and serious earthquakes and serious tornadoes and more extensive weather conditions exacerbated by climate conditions. So I feel just in saying that over the last year, we may have felt scared and we may have felt helpless, but we did something. And we acted. And as a result of that, we helped to reconfirm the necessary national view that transit technologies are fundamental to the liberty of Canadians and of people worldwide, because they are fundamentally part of the social welfare and healthcare system. And as such, they're part of our democratic social contract with Canadians. At CUTRIC, it's pretty fair to say we're good at pretty much two things: science and advocating for science, especially when it's part of transit technologies. And so to advance our social contract with Canadians, what we did last year coming out of that COVID effort and those webinars and those lessons learned was to create a very simple 5-point plan so that we could say, look, as an industry, let's act in this way and transform the nation's transit system for generations to come. Our members got together, we wrote an open letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and to Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. We urged the federal government to commit $3 billion annually to transit infrastructure, and we did all the calculations to show them that it really should go primarily to zero emissions technologies, to not fund fossil fuel transportation in the future. We also, as part of that 5-point plan, asked the government to pump up money focused on transit innovation. We've historically funded aerospace innovation, automotive innovation, and agricultural innovation, all very important, but we've really never funded transit technology innovation from the manufacturing side. So we asked for those things, and we asked again, and then we added modeling and economic forecasting, and we put our brains together, and we were able to show our federal family and our federal colleagues that essentially investments in these space would set up Canada for the future and establish that robust social contract with Canadian people, that we could deploy zero emissions buses and we could innovate them in Canada for job growth and economic recovery. And happily, the government responded. Within a few months of our first letter going out as a CUTRIC consortium and our first round of science modeling being pushed to the minister's offices, my team and I were invited to help Minister Catherine McKenna, the Minister for Infrastructure and Communities, and François-Philippe Champagne, the Minister for Innovation, Science and Industry, announce $3 billion in funding immediately for battery and hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. At the same time, the government committed another $5 billion for the Strategic Innovation Fund, which built on its previous commitment to a net zero accelerator, which is a lot of industry jargon for saying there's a lot of money now going into innovation programs that will allow us to design better powertrains, better batteries, better chargers, better software systems, better hydrogen electrolyzers, all the stuff that needs to be purchased and deployed to get to a zero emissions transit future. 1 year into the pandemic, our members have delivered on the first 3 points of our 5-point plan. We got the money for ZEB deployments, we got money for ZEB R&D, and we're nearly at the finish line for ZEB feasibility projects. We did something. We faced a pandemic and we acted. And we did the best that we could using the skills we have. Next, we're focusing on our 4th point in the 5-point plan. You're going to hear more about that through the rest of the conference around big data and integrating data into smart mobility and making sure that our data-driven systems are evidence-based. But I believe that in the last year, in the face of fear and in the face of really personal considerations about a sense of helplessness in a pandemic many of us have never faced before, this type of scenario that's discombobulating and disturbing, we were able to give ourselves meaning and able to be motivated going forward by acting in the interests of a social contract with Canadians. I'm now going to turn to my colleague Magali Frenette, who leads our Quebec office.
Bonjour tout le monde, rebonjour, je devrais dire. Mon nom c'est Magali, je suis la responsable de la réussite des membres au Québec. Alors, pour poursuivre sur la lancée de Josipa, peu de temps avant que commence la deuxième vague de la pandémie, le CUTRIC a lancé un impressionnant plan en 5 points pour assurer une mobilité intelligente à faible émission de carbone efficace, efficiente et réalisable sur le champ, en plus d'assurer le financement et l'innovation du transport en commun à zéro émission. Conçu de manière à aider le gouvernement fédéral à atteindre son objectif de mise en service de 5 000 autobus zéro émission sur les routes canadiennes d'ici 5 ans, le plan a reçu un accueil si favorable qu'il a mené à la publication d'une lettre ouverte adressée au premier ministre, M. Justin Trudeau, et à la vice-première ministre, Mme Chrystia Freeland, dans laquelle le gouvernement fédéral est exhorté d'investir 3 milliards de dollars supplémentaires par année dans les infrastructures de transport public. 3 mois plus tard, Ottawa annonce un investissement sur 8 ans d'un montant pratiquement identique, soit 14,9 milliards de dollars au cours des 8 prochaines années, incluant un financement récurrent annuel de 3 milliards de dollars pour les collectivités canadiennes à compter de 2026. Peu de temps après, notre présidente Josipa Petrunic a eu l'honneur de joindre à la ministre de l'Infrastructure et des Collectivités, Catherine McKenna, et au ministre de l'Innovation, des Sciences et de l'Industrie, François-Philippe Champagne, pour annoncer un financement de 2,75 milliards de dollars sur 5 ans à compter de 2021. Tout ça dans le but d'améliorer les systèmes de transport public et d'en assurer la transition au profit des sources d'alimentation électrique plus propres. Pendant ce temps, au Québec, notre gouvernement investit dans un plan pour une économie verte et projette d'électrifier 55% des autobus urbains d'ici 2030, en plus d'injecter 250 millions afin de mieux soutenir les transporteurs scolaires dans l'électrification de leur parc de véhicules. À toi, Josipa.
Merci, Magali. We've all been shocked and awed this year. We all wanted to act, and from those actions came a great deal of new transit innovation and green mobility solutions. Thank you again to the sponsors that have made this platform available over these 3 days. Our exclusive sponsor, ABB, our platinum sponsors, Ballard Power Systems and NFI Group, our gold sponsors, Hitachi, ABB Power Grids, Proterra, and Zev Clean Energy, or rather Zev Clean Power. Silver sponsors, Enbridge, Novabus, and Thales. Bronze sponsors, Siemens, and our media sponsors, Driving.ca and Energy Media. Without your support, we would not be able to host this 3-day event. So now it is my pleasure to welcome you all to another jam-packed day, day 2 of the 3rd annual Low Carbon Smart Mobility Technologies Conference, as we now turn our attention to the great lessons to be learned from one of Canada's most innovative jurisdictions, the city of Laval in Quebec. Enjoy.